Movies are dreams that you never forget.
What is your favorite movie?
That's one of those questions that's impossible to answer.
I love this game. I live this game. Never back down.
Now, if I've done something to you, just tell me what I've done to you.
Well, you didn't do anything to me. I just don't like you no more.
Well, what about you, Mr. Prescott? Are you ready to fly?
Let's just call it quits.
We won't call it quits. We'll call it the start.
You need to tell me what really happened in here tonight, now.
So what does our heartbeat sound like?
Mighty.
I need to know that I have done one thing right with my life.
What was your favorite part?
Welcome to this special edition of The Movie Wire. I'm your host, Justin Henson, and welcome to the show. Now, this time of year, we see so many of the best of, worst of movies of the year. These lists are fully opinionated, and I never like the wording of best of, worst of. Movies affect everybody in a different light. These lists are usually different from person to person, and film is the last great debate in our culture, where we are naturally open to hearing different opinions and outlooks and doing something that is hard in our society today, and that is actually listening to these outlooks even if we don't agree. We have all grown up with movies our entire lives, and it's almost that we are naturally taught this subconsciously to welcome different views and opinions of the way we view a particular film. Some of us grew up with a memorable experience of seeing Star Wars, Good Morning Vietnam, or Who Framed Roger Rabbit on the big screen, and see it as our starting line for the first introduction to movies, and other starting lines may have been Howard the Duck or Ernest Goes to Camp. Whatever the starting point we may have had to introduce us to movies, we grow to begin to know what type of movies really give us that emotional impact of like and love. And everybody's timeline of evolution to what we watch will be different, and thus opinions will be different. This is why I love talking about movies so much, is that it is an art that everybody can be united around, and it's always an intriguing conversation to have around all different points of view. When I look at a film, I don't look at the special effects first or what amazing actor or actress is in it. I look at that story first as a baseline and ask, does that cast and filmmakers execute in telling that story with the support of all other aspects from dialogue, acting, lighting, the compositions, and at the end of the day, was I entertained? So in this episode of The Movie Wire, I'll be sharing my favorite 10 movies that are just my favorite films of the year that stayed with me throughout 2022 at top of mind, and after watching left me with a sense of fulfillment and really did move me in an emotional way, whether that is making me laugh, bring a smile or a tear to my face, to even leaving me with a sense of awe for something I have never seen before. These films are in no way, as many would put it, the top 10 movies of the year. There is no such thing. Just like trying to pick your favorite movie, there is no such thing. These are the movies that meant something special to me this year. Now, we all have our favorite top film of the year. Some will have Top Gun Maverick, Avatar, to even Morbius, and that's okay. The cool thing about each year in movies is that people had a favorite, and that is the most important thing to remember. Now, in this episode, I will be counting down from 10 with each movie, giving a quick thought, and including my original review for each one. Now, without further ado, we have a lot of movies to cover. Ready to hear my 2022 verdict? Let's get into it.
Out of the windows to watch a roar and a burst of flame. The Movie Wire podcast.
There it is.
We just need people like me.
Podcast for hot and trending movies.
The Wire.
And here we go.
Number 10 is The Unbearable Weight of a Massive Talent. Now, the return of Nicolas Cage on the big screen in a movie about Nick Cage, who gets involved in a plot that is straight out of one of his movies. What makes this movie so special to me is how self-aware and true it stays to what it wants to be, and never really takes itself too seriously, with a consistent tone and a pace that is wildly entertaining and just plain fun. It's a creative premise that doesn't really hold back any punches ranges from poking fun at itself and Nick Cage, with memorable characters and a clever script. From episode 13, here is my review of The Unbearable Weight of a Massive Talent. I feel odd saying this because I feel I shouldn't, but as I chew as a mere thought of it, it makes complete sense. There is something very nostalgic about this film. It feels that word shouldn't have any place in a movie like this, but the feeling couldn't escape me while watching this film. Is it because, other than animated films, we haven't seen Nicolas Cage in a major motion picture in over 10 to 11 years? His last movie that hit theaters was The Croods 2, which the film does poke fun at in an amusing way. There is a pleasant feeling of seeing Nicolas Cage back on the big screen that isn't the only reason for the sense of nostalgia. The movie gives hints of the 90s style of action movies when they were actually memorable. The film just doesn't feature Nick Cage and role-playing himself. The film puts him in situations that feels natural, but at the same time gives us the same feeling as a Nick Cage 90s action film. Now, the film is about Nick Cage and mimicking some of his poor choices during his career. Cage must accept a $1 million offer to attend the birthday party of a dangerous superfan, Javi, played by the amazing Pedro Pascal. Things take a wildly unexpected turn when Cage is recruited by a CIA operative, Vivian, played by Tiffany Haddish, and Cage is forced to live up to his own legacy and ego channeling his past characters to save himself and those he loves. Now, the movie is fictional, but there are pieces that you can tell are part of Cage's life, and what I really loved is the bold honesty that Cage portrays himself as, where he and his career is not all butterflies and rainbows. The message the movie portrays is being famous doesn't necessarily make you relevant. It's human nature to be relevant in a world where we want to be noticed and heard. I couldn't think of a better actor to take on the storyline like this, with such humility and with such great execution. The film challenges us to ask the question in the first half of the film: is there a difference between an egomaniac or somebody that just wants to matter to somebody's life? This sets up a hero we want to root for, a once box office king actor to a career troubled man with a developed family trouble over the years. It sets up for a true hero you want to see win. The writers check a lot of boxes to ensure we have somebody that's going to take a majority of the screen time that the audience will enjoy, but they don't go overboard. The movie was directed and written by Tom Gormican, whose other directorial experiences of the 2014 film That Awkward Moment. Alongside with Gormican is writer Kevin Eaton. They both wrote for the comedy show Ghosted together, but Eaton has some brilliant comedy show writing credits under his belt, including Son of Zorn, Scrubs, Reaper, The Late Show with David Letterman, and a personal favorite, Workaholic. Eaton's writing is very distinct if you've watched some of his previous work. He never just goes for full gut belly laughs, but subtle chuckles to make the audience smile. This movie is full of his humor, to subtly chuckle under your breath, and watching Cage and Pascal together with his humor, I'm going to say borderline adorable. Cage and Pascal create something special in this movie, and the characters surely grow together in a natural way that doesn't feel forced. Gormican and Eaton know what chemistry they had with these two fine actors, and they knew what kind of movie they wanted to make. It would have been very easy for these two to have a very awkward chemistry looking back at the film. But when the two are on screen, it is a completely natural chemistry. We would have think these two would have been friends for years. It's almost like a childlike innocence with these two when they're together on screen, and it makes the audience want more. What I found interesting about the characters of the film is they all complement each other whenever they're on screen with Cage. Let's take, for example, Cage's fictional ex-wife, Olivia, played by Horgan, who is obviously annoyed by Cage's life choices and his misunderstood desire for attention, but she never falls to play the stereotypical Hollywood ex-wife that you see over and over again. One that rolls her eyes in the mere presence of the ex-husband. One that throws insults anytime the two are on screen. That's not her. That's not her character in this film. She genuinely wants Cage to get his life figured out to be there for their 16-year-old fictional daughter, Addie, played by Lily Mo Sheen, who Cage mostly wants to feel relevant to the most. And the film just doesn't give problems and has one single scene that solves the entire conflict. The film itself progresses naturally. This is refreshing to watch. It balances out very nicely. The pacing on this is pretty spot on when it comes down to the two conflicts that Cage is encountering. Now, towards the end of the third act, leading up to the climax, the film can be a little unrealistic when it comes to just the dialogue and the character motives. But what I liked about the action is that it doesn't follow the same action formula, where you have this unfit, older character that suddenly becomes this pumped-up action star. He doesn't do that. He stays Nick Cage, and the action isn't over the top. is just enough to keep the audience engaged without rolling their eyes. This movie took me by surprise. Even though I love the premise of the film, I thought it looked kind of ridiculous, but the movie is good. The movie hits the mark for me on so many levels. The writing is smart, the characters are naturally likable, the chemistry between all the characters is absolutely entertaining, and I generally hope that this is the movie that will bring Nick Cage back to the big screen. Patton Oswalt stars in a film about a dad that is trying to connect with his son by creating a fake Facebook profile and pretending to be a girl that is interested in his son in I Love My Dad. Now, I Love My Dad is a bizarre and cringy movie, but intentional. The movie does a fantastic job on juggling the balance between our emotions. There are times we feel for the son, and then as adults we can relate to the father. Then there are times we have to cover our eyes from the cringiness of the actions and the situations. It is a brave movie with the subject matter it tries to tackle, and it will definitely encourage a debate of what's right or wrong after viewing. All this with the outstanding performance from Patton Oswalt makes this my 9th favorite film this year. Take a listen to my original review on episode 30. I Love My Dad came as a big surprise to me. Patton Oswalt plays Chuck, a father who has lost his connection with his son Franklin. So Chuck comes up with a plan to create a new Facebook account under the name Becca. This is a movie that's not going to be for everybody, and some will have difficulty watching it after the first 20 minutes of the cringiness of what the dad is coxing up. Some people might have trouble with how uncomfortable this film actually pushes the limits to be. Some people might have moral debates because of all the issues I've just brought up the movie addresses. The movie doesn't hide away from these topics of the moral dilemma. The film recognizes how uncomfortable it is and asks itself some moral questions throughout the entire movie. The film will have its cringy moments where you find yourself covering your eyes or literally cringing at the screen, but it also has moments that you literally laugh out loud, and that's a sign the filmmakers got it right. Now, this is the second film where James Morosini has written and directed. The first one was called 3-something from 2018, and what Morosini does with this comedy is what other filmmakers and studios would have either passed on for its pure creepiness or make it a very slapstick type of movie that tries to push the limits in the wrong direction. This is a movie that you don't know what it tries to be, and it does so on purpose. And sadly, the film will most likely be overlooked, and I hope that's not the case. I hope this film becomes more and more of a cult following as it becomes readily available on streaming platform. Patton Oswalt does an incredibly brilliant job in this film. We mostly see Oswalt as supporting characters and usually in some goofy roles. And I have always been a fan of Patton Oswalt. The time he's on the small screen or big screen, he usually lights up the screen and puts his all into it. I Love My Dad is a film that's kind of out of his normal, where he has to balance the dramatic aspect and the comedy aspect of his performance. And his performance is nothing less than brilliant. This is an absolute breakout performance by Oswalt, and this is the reason we need to see more of him. This, hands down, is his best performance he has given in his long and lasting career in Hollywood, and it is one of the best performances I've seen almost all year. Oswalt's performance will stay with me for quite some time. This movie will show what a brilliant actor he can be given the right material that he's put in front of him. Oswalt proved in this film he can lead a movie and he can dominate the screen and give performances that will stay with the audience for years to come. When it comes to the chemistry of Oswalt and Morosini, it's believable, it's emotional, it's engaging. And even though the situation can be borderline uncomfortable or even past the border of uncomfortable or morally questionable, Morosini and Oswalt play as a powerhouse of a father and son. Their chemistry is uncomfortable and awkward, as it should be as an estranged father that stays away from his son. Their interactions are that of a teenager that would interact with an adult, where it's not overacted and it's quiet and awkward and quirky, and then there's tensions that build up. That's when we see the fallout. As I said earlier, this movie's a borderline comedy. It's up for interpretation. It's not a direct ha-ha laugh-in-your-face comedy, but it does have its moments, and some of those moments you're wondering if you should even laugh, or what you're laughing at, or why you're even laughing in the first place. But when the comedy hits, you know it hits because it gives you a good old belly laugh. The filmmakers make the scenario comical. The performances balance to that of realistic relationship between father and son. What I loved about the movie balance is they actually address the moral questioning of what Chuck is trying to do. They don't question what kind of father he is. He has the right intention. His intent is just, but the way he's going about it is questionable. The movie doesn't shy away for questioning the intent of Chuck, but they do question his actions towards it. Both Morosini and Oswalt show performance of vulnerability. We see both characters go through anxiety, they go through depression, they go through hopelessness, and they both want to be loved by someone. The film does tackle a bunch of tough subjects such as the father-son relationship, depression, depression, anxiety, mental health, and human nature of how one interacts with one another that contributes to all our mental well-being. And the film does something very unique with this. It does it in a respectable way, even when the plot seems a little too borderline questionable or borderline comedic. What I like about Morrison's style is that he adds some very unique and specific detail in the movie. He makes it very easy for the audience to follow along with what's going on. There are scenes where the father and son are texting back and forth, and you see Becca appear in a vision like they're actually in person talking. And what I liked about this, you can interpret it of how Morrison is receiving and understanding text messages. As we know, people interpret text messages in a different way. This is to make the messaging clear on what Morrison is interpreting the messages to say, or what he wants her to feel. It gives the audience something to follow along to that's easy to understand. Like we're actually feeling that there is a relationship between Becca and Franklin. We're invested in their relationship, even though there is no relationship, and it is smart filmmaking. Now, what holds this film back is almost a cliche ending. Now, the ending isn't bad, it's just quick and cliche, and I feel the film deserved a little bit more effort when it comes to the final product in the end, but that's a minor nitpick to how well I Love My Dad is made. This movie is a great example of the things that can be done by telling a story with such a reserved budget. It utilizes the tools that it has when it comes to style, emotionally impacts the audience in a positive way, it invites the audience to be engaged on where these characters are going to go. I Love My Dad is held up by amazing performances by Patton Oswalt and Morrison, and if you were to watch anything on streaming this week, this has to be it. And again, some of the subject matter might not set well with some people. The cringiness might not fit the bill for some audiences, but I challenge you to give this movie a shot. It is a movie that will stay with you when it comes to the brilliant performances and storyline and the style. This movie does so many things right. This is one of the best movies I've seen on streaming all year. I'm giving I Love My Dad 3.5 stars. There are so many movies that try and tackle the topic of intimacy and sexuality, but where those films usually fail is that they treat the two as contrast versus similarity and never really connect to the audience as natural. Good Luck to You, Leo Grande gives us something different and never steers away from being taboo, yet an intriguing character study on the human struggle to have a human connection. With a memorable chemistry between Emma Thompson and Daryl McCormack as my pick for number 8, here is from episode 23, Good Luck to You, Leo Grande. Intimacy can lead to deep conversation, honesty, improved happiness, and a sense of overall well-being. Some are open and some struggle with the sense of comfort with intimacy, and even the meaning of what intimacy is. The same goes for Nancy Stokes, played by Emma Thompson in this Hulu original movie. Thompson plays Nancy, a 55-year-old widow who is yearning for some adventure, human connection, and some sex. Some good old sex. There are many films that have tackled the topic of sex and intimacy. It is a hard topic to cover in film and execute it right. From 50 Shades of Grey to Original Sin to Sirens to Eyes Wide Shut, there is an overlaying theme to these movies that seems seductive, taboo, dark, dirty, and gritty. There hasn't been a film in recent memory as I give this review that I can think of that surrounds a film with sex and intimacy and portrays it in a positive, natural way, and it involves a male escort. And the film is shot pretty much in one setting. This would only work if the filmmakers had a good dialogue, good written characters, and a likable cast. And I will say, studios should take notes from this film. Director Sophie Hyde and writer Kathy Brand have turned the tables when it comes to this topic in film, sex. Sex is a topic in our lives from our younger teenager years until the end of our life. The question would arise to why is it such a hard topic in film to cover where it doesn't feel like the studio's making it sleazy to ensure the statement of sex sells stays relevant. The film is not sleazy, it's not dark, it invites the audience into an open conversation, and it isn't afraid to show the honest vulnerabilities that many may face. What director Hyde and writer Brand do is create a film that tackles the topic of intimacy and sex in an honest way. The two topics are in fact different, but can be treated the same. They give a taboo plot of Nancy Stokes wanting to explore her sexual needs by hiring a male escort, Leo Grande, played by Daryl McCormack, to help fulfill her needs, if you will. Part of the success of this film is likely due to the fact Sophie Hyde's experience in directing documentary films, where she understands the importance of studying the characters. And the surprise here is the writing from Katie Brand, who has acted in numerous roles, including Nanny McPhee Returns, Walking on Sunshine, and numerous TV specials. But what got me when looking up her writing credits to find what inspired her to write such a sexually honest film was that she wrote a miniseries entitled Glued, and it's a few years old, about a married couple whose relationship evolved after binge watching a TV show. And I remember this TV show and finding it brilliant. Her work from Glued you can see trickle into this film, but in a different style. Hyde and Brand seemed to be on the same page when they went to make this film. They both knew the end goal of what they were trying to create. Emma Thompson's character Nancy is well written and realistic, with an outstanding classy performance by the always lovely Emma Thompson, who is a character that the audience can either relate to or sympathize with. The role of Nancy almost seems like it was written just for Miss Thompson. It is one of those roles after viewing it you can't picture any other actress pulling it off. The initial meeting between Nancy and Leo while they first meet shows a very nervous Nancy and a very confident Leo, as you would expect with an escort and a first-time 55-year-old woman ordering an escort. It would be very easy to make this situation into an overdone attempt at comedy, but the filmmakers have the film completely under control and know what they're going after. The filmmakers never go after just sex. They build up conversation. They have the characters speak their needs. These are real human conversations that Nancy and Leo have, and there is a human nature of being closed-lipped when first becoming intimate in a sexual situation, and Hyde realizes this and doesn't try and hide it. Instead, she goes all in. Nancy would be a great character study if Hyde and Brand wanted her to be, but instead of hiding and letting the audience decide and dissect her character, she was smart. Following the theme of intimacy, we learn as we go along with Leo, the pain, the insecurities, and we as an audience don't judge her, we understand her. What was smart by writer Brand is not just to assume that Nancy is the only one that has intimacy issues. There are many different types, and the film takes us on a journey of both characters' pain and insecurity. But the film brings up and also begs the question of what would lead a person to becoming an escort. With each encounter, the film piques our interest, and that's not because of the conversation or the topic of sex, but to wonder what level of intimacy they will reach so we can learn more about them. There are multiple scenes where the pair are just laying in bed or sitting, and there is sexual undertone, but the conversation is more interesting, and I loved watching and discovering alongside with both of the characters. Given a film about sex, the filmmakers treat it like a first date for the audience, and each encounter doesn't always involve sex. There are conversations, there's a build of trust, and Leo recognizes this and keeps the audience curious if it's his job or if he actually cares for Nancy. The character of Leo is almost a mystery the entire movie of what his intentions are, and that adds to each interaction with Nancy to feel fresh and brand new. During the end of the third act, the conflict that arises seems to be kind of forced, and I didn't feel a natural transition to. The film seemed entirely natural until that moment of conflict between Nancy and Leo. I would have rather seen a conflict that arises from a natural conversation of discovery between the two, instead of adding an additional situation. But it doesn't hold back the movie, and in fairness, in a way, we can understand Nancy's decision during this conflict. The film tackles a tough situation, tough topic, and it does so in a positive, pleasing, entertaining, and satisfying way. The film will have your eyes glued to it, just like when I walk past one of my wife's reality shows. This will keep you entertained for the entire runtime due to the smart dialogue. It is rare to have a film like this with limited sets and have it dialogue driven. This is one of Emma Thompson's best performances, and the character chemistry is in top form between Thompson and McCormick. My recommendation, open up a bottle of wine with your partner, put on something comfortable, turn down the lights, maybe put on some perfume or cologne, I don't know, and enjoy Good Luck to You, Leo Grande. I'm giving Good Luck to You, Leo Grande 4 stars.
7.
Number 7 on the list is The Fabelmans by Steven Spielberg. Now, this is one of those movies you can tell was very personal to Steven Spielberg, and we can tell while watching. There is a familiar Spielberg tone while watching, but something that we see different in compared to most Spielberg films, and that was the level of raw intimacy with his characters that gives a looking glass into how important art is in our lives to help not only with our emotional output, but sculpting it into creation of stories. It's a love letter to not just movies, but the creation of putting emotion on screen in the form of a story. From episode 49, here is my number 7, The Fabelmans. Now, we have all had that moment or experience, if you will, that when we go to a movie, we have a sense of euphoria and a little bit of awe that sweeps across our face in pure amazement and wonderment, mostly as we are kids, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's during your first movie-going experience. And the movie is going to be different for everybody. I remember I was 11 when I got my first sense of wonderment from film, but it wasn't just the film that helped lead to this. It was the experience following up to it. I remember checking the showtimes on the Seattle Times newspaper. I remember the experience from the parking lot to the long ticket sales line to standing in line to get into the theater. This was the film Jurassic Park. I remember receiving the original book as a birthday gift back in 1992, which I must have read back to back and cover to cover until the film adaptation came out, which again was also directed by Steven Spielberg. And the book helped lead to my excitement of seeing this film, but there was also a sense of fear of what I was going to see. At times it was hard to differentiate the difference between the excitement or fear. As the lights went down in the theater to a sold-out audience, it was clear that my excitement took hold beyond fear. There's a scene that gave me this sense of awe and pinned a crossroads of film into my head, and it isn't a scene that most people would find a pivotal moment, or one that you think back to when you saw Jurassic Park. And it's not the initial introduction of the T-Rex, it isn't anything with the Velociraptors, but rather we have our corrupt park hacker Dennis Nedry speed towards the docks with his stolen dinosaur embryos. There's a sense of thrill if he's going to make it in time to only have his Jeep get stuck, only to be attacked by the venomous Dilophosaur, and we see Nedry escape to inside his Jeep to close the door. There's a sense of safety before we hear the rattling and the snarl of our prehistoric beast. And then the camera pans out to outside the Jeep just as Nedry screams bloody murder. And that was followed up by my father shaking me and saying boo right in my ear directly after it happens. I was left excited yet terrifying with so many emotions of thrill to this scene. This movie got me so excited for what I witnessed on screen, I thought it was so cool. I found myself afterwards reading the book yet again, and collecting as many dinosaur toys as I could, even building my own Jurassic Park out of cardboard and action figures. Movies have a way to bring out new feelings and emotions we didn't even know we could feel, and we usually see that at a younger age as we start to discover new experiences and discover how to handle our emotions. Steven Spielberg's new film, The Fabelmans, taps into the emotion in a way we haven't seen Spielberg before. In his semi-autobiographical story, this is a much different Spielberg that we haven't seen, that introduces a more honest and raw version of storytelling that we aren't used to when it comes to Spielberg. There's almost something poetic on what Spielberg does here, especially when watching The Fabelmans. It reminded me of the sense of wonder we get from watching a film, and in my case I was reminded of Jurassic Park, and as we grow to discover more and more emotion on how to deal with our own emotions. Now this is where the magic of movies have played a big part in our lives and are able to tap into our emotional response, and also a reason why there are so many different tastes in movies, so many likes and dislikes of certain films, and of course different interpretations of how we view a film. Spielberg demonstrates this without spelling it out and requires the audience to just pay attention at our characters' facial expressions and body language on top of just the spoken word. It's almost like watching a silent film where the characters have to use over-featured moments and facial reactions. These facial expressions happen more in the adults than our kids because parents have this expectation to create a memory and experience and an emotional response just like film. The movie follows Sammy, played by Gabrielle LaBelle, from ages 7 to 8, and takes him through the moments from the first time he was taken to the theater by his mother and father, Mitzi and Bert Fabelman, played by Michelle Williams and Paul Dano, where outside the theater the parents explain to Sammy what he is about to see inside the theater. And with a child's unknown fear, Sammy isn't sure if he was going to like going to a moving picture show. But inside, we are met alongside Sammy with a darkened theater with the projector light shining like a magic wand onto the screen, with a shot of Sammy's face of pure child innocence of amazement as he watches a train robbery on screen. With that single shot of Sammy's face, it is the face of why theaters are so important, even more so today, as we more commonly nowadays hear adults cheer on the straight-to-streaming option as a form of convenience and the option to not spend that much money. We forget how that experience affects a lot of kids growing up to unlock the imagination and to pin that memory into their head. Taking kids away from the theater is like taking away Santa Claus away from a child's Christmas. Sammy soon becomes obsessed with shooting films and discovers he has a talent for practical effects and camera shots. As he lives his life through a lens, he starts to discover through a looking glass, if you will, a family that's struggling to find their happiness and sometimes captures the money shot of pure bliss. The film was also written by Spielberg and a frequent collaborator, Tony Kirshner, from West Side Story, Lincoln, and Munich, in which the pair does a fantastic job giving us a realistic and strategic dialogue of a traditional Jewish family during the times of World War II, without getting distracted to steer away from the vision and point that Spielberg is trying to portray. The film screens confidence and a laser focus to the point, and you can feel the heart and Spielberg's sweet kiss from his own experiences growing up in this movie. There are 2 films Spielberg has done where you can feel his emotion, love, and heart that went into every shot, every word, to even every character expression, where we feel his character direction is in top form. And that is Schindler's List and now The Fabelmans. As we see Sammy go throughout the film, we see his talent in making movies. We also see a crescendo of awkwardness and emotion from the parents that obviously have some marital issues and think they can hide it, not realizing that kids are smarter and more observant than they give them credit for. Especially with Sammy, one with an eye for shooting a story and getting the perfect shot. Parents Mitzi and Bert, again played by Williams and Dano, give two of the best performances of their career in this, and their characters think they are doing the best when it comes to protecting their kids by hiding the fact there are issues. This is where The Fabelmans is the most successful. It keeps the audience in the eyes of Sammy, where we have that awkward feeling from the interactions with Mitzi and Bert to the awkward looks and silence where we feel something is wrong, but we just don't know what. The film takes its time not to give more to the audience than it does to Sammy, so we can stay present with Sammy and his observations, the portrayal of the family during this time and the expectations of society and the vision of values of marriage during this era was in a stricter context than it is today. Now, you take today where everybody's dirty laundry is poured onto a social media platform for all to see. As the film moves on to the second half, these emotions increase, not just from our parents, but from Sammy. And all the emotions from the other characters are bottled up or withheld to almost stages of trying to create happiness by adding additional things that they think would help the happiness, but in reality it adds to the weight of frustration, from more work to other love interests to a high school crush to adding a monkey to the household. By the time we get to the top of the crescendo, each of our characters have to eventually deal with their own happiness, to find a path in the crossroads to find that happiness. And what I can appreciate about the uniqueness of this storytelling here is that it doesn't get too caught up in the drama or aftermath of the confrontation, but rather each individual's pain and life's path. This is where you can really tell that Spielberg wanted to tell a story from the perspective of Sammy, on what he saw and understood growing up. There is a certain level of respect to each of the parents, Mitzi and Bert, even if you don't agree with their life's actions. But it again shows a view of how Sammy still has love for each one of his parents, but is unsure how to handle his emotion. And it is brilliantly, subtly handled. And as we see the level of respect Spielberg treats these two characters, and it is apparent that Spielberg treats these two characters with a level of respect, and can also be a tribute to his own parents that both had recently passed away. His mother passed away in 2017, and his father at the age of 103 passed away in 2020. In which both were divorced in 1966. He treats these characters as a son would respect and love his parents, even though he might not agree with the decision on their life's journey along the way. The Fabelmans is Spielberg's most raw and subtly emotional feat that won't necessarily make you shed a tear, but to understand the pain of growing up that doesn't follow the normal Spielberg formula, but rather a raw coming-of-age story with an honesty and a journey we take with our Fabelman family about the way we view and deal with emotion and how we even express it. It is a true sneak peek into the filmmaker and the love for the camera he has growing up. The performances you will fall in love with, more notably Paul Dano, who gives a performance of his career and will stay with you well after the film is over. I'm giving The Fabelmans 3.5 stars. Number 6 is The Triangle of Sadness, a Lord of the Flies set against the rich and the poor. Ruben Östlund gives us another social commentary with subtle and dry humor that portrays his messaging without coming across preachy, and is full of incredible performances, including Woody Harrelson as our drunken ship captain and Dolly De Leon as Abigail. This is a movie that would have been so easy to be full of unlikable characters, but each one has a driver for the progression of the story and is another Östlund film to really open up dialogue after viewing. From episode 42, here is my review of Triangle of Sadness. Triangle of Sadness is written and directed by Ruben Östlund, who to me is known for his sharp dialogue, powerful opinions through story, and when it seems like he's pushing commentary that deems in your face, is actually more of a read between the lines. It's almost as he's having a debate with himself. Östlund has a true talent for laying out social commentary through story and is a master craftsman at it. And if you haven't seen his work, you need to check out movies such as The Square, Force Majeure, Involuntary, and Play. This film reaches to be a dark comedy social satire with a strategic list of unique characters. The movie splits itself up into, of course, 3 acts, and each one feels like it could be its own movie by itself. Act 1 sets a mild tone when it comes to what Östlund is going to introduce us to. We have our 2 famous models, Carl and Yaya, played by Harris Dickinson, and Charles Bydeen, who are out to eat what seems to be an expensive restaurant. As a check lays by the table, Carl looks nervously between the check and Yaya, and as he gives a subtle cough and nudge to the check, Yaya, staring at her phone, assumes that he is going to pay. And as she avoids eye contact by putting her main focus on her phone, she utters an unsympathetic thank you to Carl. This opens up the start of one of many conversations during the film about money and gender roles. Now let's fast forward to on board the luxury yacht where we see the crew start to prepare for our extremely rich guests. where we have Paula, played by Vicky Berlin, give a motivational speech to the waitstaff about how she understands the challenges of the service industry, and the end goal is to ensure the staff gets a hefty tip as the camera pans to the cleaning crew below deck. Paula then visits and knocks on the cabin door of our alcoholic captain that is held up in his room, played by Woody Harrelson, where he tells Laura he isn't feeling well enough to join the rest of the crew on deck. Uslan has a lot of characters to introduce us to, and he runs into the challenge of overwhelming us, or just giving us a brief description that gives us very little to care about. And what he does with each and every character is make them interesting enough to look forward to in future interactions. Some of these characters are likable, some of them are cleverly placed as satire vehicles, such as a very humorous character, a woman that claims that the sails are dirty, and the staff must clean them, when she is told that this is a motorized yacht and they didn't have sails on the boat. Given her status quo and not wanting to be wrong, she still demands that the sails be cleaned by the staff. But each character plays as though we are all on this yacht socializing with this colorful bunch of characters, including one of my favorite characters, Dimitri, played by Zlatko Borch, who made his fortune in the manure business. Now, the entire cast gives it their all in their performances, and with the sharp, on-point writing by Uslan, this really makes us look forward to see where they're going to go with the material. It keeps this film engaging to watch for its 2.5-hour runtime. Woody Harrelson is especially good as the captain. He was a treat to watch, but I wish we would have seen more of him in this film. Given the little screen time he has, you can tell he was having a ball with the role as our alcoholic captain. Uslan does something that is mere perfection when it comes to his character writing and direction here, where it is easy not to like the idea of privileged rich characters or even make it hard to relate to them. But Uslan doesn't make it over the top. He still adds a human element to them, but their actions deemed privileged, but their interactions are still human. There are times, yes, we do have moments of cringy, privileged, rich requests to the staff, but it doesn't discredit the characters to the point we don't want to see them on screen. Uslan builds these characters up just enough to really get to know these characters without truly knowing them. When we finally get our captain out of his drunken slump to attend a captain's dinner in a scene that shows off Uslan's understanding of how to tell a story without overdoing it. The dinner scene will be one of the most memorable scenes, and for sure will probably be one of the most talked about scenes. And fair warning, this scene is not for ones with delicate stomachs, where we find the entire dinner party get sick, and this is one of my favorite scenes as well, but not for the pure disgust of it, but where Uslan shines. This is where Uslan takes his movie up a level and where we see the wheels start to turn on where he's going to go with his messaging. It's almost like watching an introduction in the middle of the movie, and he adds a sense of chaos in this scene that doesn't run hyper speed. He appreciates the tone of chaos and takes his time building it up so the audience can really take it in and the messaging is not lost in translation. The chaotic scene is somewhat narrated by our drunk captain and our manure millionaire Dimitri as they discuss communism, socialism, and government failures over the intercom. Now, I have talked about my taste in chaos in film numerous times on the show. I love a good chaotic film if executed right. And Uslan masters this to a perfect balance of chaos and commentary. And when we look at Uslan's social commentary, what I like about his work is that it isn't in your face, preachy. It isn't one-sided. He gives just enough to open up a thought process and invite you to a respectful conversation. His intent is true due to the fact you can see that in the way he wrote and directed his characters. Now, when we have our passengers on the island, the setup almost comes across like it's going to end up like a Lord of the Flies scenario. We have our Rich and our 2 crew members stranded on the island, one of them being Abigail, played by Dolly De Leon, who is a maid, or what the film calls it, a toilet cleaner. De Leon gives an outstanding performance here where she has to balance likability, power, and leadership without becoming the villain, and Uslan justifies her actions with what the audience can relate to without making her tone feel too unhuman, when in fact he makes it completely relatable to the point we almost want to root for her, and that's also due in part to the rest of the cast understanding her position, and their understanding their survival is determined on this one woman that can build a fire, fish, and provide. Their future survival is relied upon her character. Now, I was torn in Act 3 and felt a little selfish. Even though it's a satisfying act and it's a good balance between the rest of the film, I almost wanted to see a Lord of the Flies transition to show the harshness of society. But I can understand why Uslan didn't want to fall into this trap, even though this would be messaging to show a very harsh and ugliness side to society to support his messaging. That wasn't his real intent in the story that he wanted to tell. His story satire was about money, power, gender roles and the cause of effect of power. To have the best experience with this film, it is recommended to not see the trailer and just kind of go in blindsided. This is a movie that should be seen in theaters, to demand your entire attention to the screen, to really appreciate the subtleties, sharp dialogue, and the chemistry between all the characters. And knowing that, this film is not going to be for everyone, but what I loved about what Ruben Östlund does with this, he keeps the commentary to a neutral tone and shows examples of communication and interaction of the characters when it comes to power, money, and the cause and effect of privileges. This is a movie that's not just a survival movie, that is the least of what it is. And that is why it's best going into this movie without seeing the trailer and just enjoy the subtle chaos, enjoyable characters, outstanding performances across the board, and a rare film that doesn't shove a creator's vision and commentary down your throat with propaganda, but rather opens up your mind and encourages healthy conversation when the film is done. I'm giving Triangle of Sadness 3.5 stars. Now, before we get into the rest of the show, just a reminder that most of the movies on my top 10 at the time of this review are available to rent, buy, and stream, with the exception of just one. Make sure to check out these films and let me know your thoughts on Twitter, Instagram, or Letterboxd at Movie Show. And also, it is that time in the Seattle area where I will be taking part in the Snohomish Film Festival. Submissions are being accepted right now for review. If you have a film you'd like to submit, just go to www.filmfreeway.com/Snohomish Film Festival. I am excited and I cannot wait to see your movie. Now, before we go right back in with the last top 5 films, I just want to give a quick recommendation for a podcast that just always seems to put me in a great mood and brings a smile to my face, and that's the Super Familiar with the Wilsons podcast. They have been missing in action the last couple of weeks, and now they are back with a super familiar vengeance that just feels like home. Make sure you check out the Super Familiar with the Wilsons podcast. Let's hear from them now.
The Super Familiar with the Wilsons podcast. You know that family whose house you hung out in when you were a kid? The house was a little loud and chaotic, but always fun, and sometimes felt more home than home. Well, that's us.
We're the Wilsons, and we welcome you into our podcast with silly chat, ridiculous games, and interviews with interesting people.
Like a spin doctor. The Super Familiar with the Wilsons podcast.
Welcome home.
Welcome back to the final 5, and sitting at number 5 is The Outfit. It was impossible for me not to take my eyes off of the character-driven story driven by Mark Rylance, who plays a cutter that must outwit a dangerous group of mobsters all in one setting the movie is shot in, which is his tailor shop. Coming out earlier in the year, this is one that was not only easy to miss, but also got lost throughout the year. But between the music score, the tone, the intense but subtle dialogue, with outstanding performances, this is one that I have revisited during multiple viewings this year that really shows the range of Mark Rylance. From episode 15, here's my original review of The Outfit. A master English tailor, Leonard, played by Mark Rylance, operates a corner tailor shop with his assistant, Mabel, played by Zoe Deutch. He makes beautiful clothes for only the people around who can afford them. A family of vicious gangsters. One unfortunate night, 2 mobsters knock on his door in need of a favor. Leonard is thrust into a deadly game of deception and cat and mouse. Now, there are times where I complain that there are not enough dialogue-driven thrillers anymore, and this movie understands a good slow burn. This movie finds a rock and turns it into a diamond. The movie is written and directed by Graham Moore, whose previous works include the incredible film The Imitation Game with Benedict Cumberbatch. Graham teams up with writer Jonathan McLean, whose resume is pretty slim besides the TV show Liv and Maddie that ran from 2014 to 2017. Now, watching this film, I could almost visualize it, the writing pair working together on this. The random calls throughout the days, throughout the nights, asking each other, what if? The movie has one major stage that would be the tailor shop. The movie wastes no time in jumping into the environment that includes no opening title to the film. We are transported directly into the world of Leonard and his shop alongside his assistant Mabel. The two have an absolute lovely relationship that perks our interest as almost a father and daughter dynamic, in which the two joust about early in the first act. The movie keeps Leonard and Mabel very subtle as almost the backdrop to the mobsters that visit their shop to do mysterious drop-offs and letters of packages. Most movies that go this route of choosing the one backdrop are usually based on plays or a novel. This is an original piece, which makes it that much more more special. The film reminded me of the film 12 Angry Men. 12 Angry Men was about 12 jurors that have to spend an hour-and-a-half runtime to decide the fate of a man on trial for murder. Now, I can deep dive and go on and on about 12 Angry Men on an hour-long episode, but let's get back to my next point of the 12 Angry Men. Now, if you haven't seen the film, you might not follow my next comment. Leonard is definitely the juror number 8 character. In 12 Angry Men, that juror has to be the one to convince the entire rest of the ensemble that the defendant is innocent. He stands on his own to convince the others. The two films are completely different films, but in style, suspense, and leaving the audience to make the decision of who is right and who is wrong, given the filmmakers make every character count when they're on screen. That includes likability, credibility, and how to move the story forward. Graham does a fantastic job keeping the audience engulfed into a world and a situation that Leonard is in. Mark Rylance, who has played some memorable odd roles, you might not recognize him in this film right away. You might remember him from films like Ready Player One as Holiday, the eccentric Steve Jobs mimic in Don't Look Up, and the giant from the BFG, and the incredible film Dunkirk. The film showcases Rylance's talents of being a versatile actor, and as I give this review, I realize I made a mistake on the description of his occupation, in which he makes clear in the film. He is not a tailor, he is a cutter, which is a craft. Rylance did prepare for the role by being trained in tailoring techniques by the famous Huntsman's tailors of Savile Row that you can see in the Kingsman series, and you can actually see the iconic house momentarily in the film. Rylance does a fantastic job at saying subtle but powerful and relevant in the film. Now, there's a thing that Leonard's character does in this movie that stuck with me. There's a couple scenes where Leonard picks up a cigarette box whenever a conversation builds to be chaotic, and he does this throughout the film, where he offers a cigarette to a young mob thug, Francis, played by Johnny Flynn, in which Leonard signals the audience to relax. He's got the situation under control. It's a true gentleman move and a great sight to see in the movie. It almost puts the audience at ease when we actually see it. The film is built upon lies, twists and turns, and never gives too much away. It takes us on a dialogue-driven thrill ride along with the cast. It makes the audience believe they don't even know where the film is headed, as an audience are on this journey together. There is a difference between a dialogue-driven film and one that invites the audience into its world to go along for the ride. The dialogue is well written, it's smart, it's realistic, without being over the top. The only character I had trouble connecting with that felt kinda miscast was Francis, played by Johnny Flynn. I had trouble connecting with him at times, and you can tell he felt intimidated by the style of this movie, where he seemed to be out of his element. His performance was too casual compared to the other cast members. I didn't get a believable take on his character in his performance, which is a complete shame, since he is a vital part of where this story goes. The film has a runtime of 1 hour and 45 minutes that completely flies by. The movie is smart, thrilling due to the cast and writers, uses no special effects as fillers. It uses the talent on screen to invite us into this amazing film. This is one of my favorite movies of the year, and so far one of the best movies of the year. It's available on most streaming platforms right now. The Outfit gets 3.5 stars. Number 4 is The Whale. This is one of those movies that you either loved or hated. It has received 1 star all the way up to 4 to 5 stars, depending on the critic. The reviews have been all over the place, but the one thing that everybody can agree on is the performance by Brendan Fraser. Walking out of the theater, I said to myself, there is not one performance that has topped that this year. Now, I have seen The Whale about 3 times since my first visit, and this film was the hardest one to place between 1 to 5. But the film does have some minor flaws that tries to be covered by Fraser's performance, but all things considered are still noticeable. But one thing for sure, this film will be indented into my head for years to come. Some might not like the film, but it is impossible not to like the performances. From episode 52, here is my review of The Whale. Now, we have seen good performances, great performances, even amazing performances, and then performances that go beyond the spectrum that just stay with you and talk directly to your soul, and the only word you can think of to describe it is just breathtaking. I'm not even going to wait until later in this review to talk about it. Brendan Fraser's performance deserves to be at the start of this review. There's not a single performance in 2022 that matches the level Fraser put into this role. 2022 has been filled with good, great, and amazing performances, but Brendan Fraser's portrayal of our obese English teacher Charlie will cast an echo through your mind for years to come. When it comes to Oscar time, there is no question that Brendan Fraser will get the nomination, and no offense to whoever gets nominated alongside him, but I will be utterly devastated and shocked if he doesn't come out to win the Best Actor. As we reached the end of the movie, when we had the final shot hit the screen and the credits started to roll, I saw something that I've only seen maybe 2 other times this last year. Not one soul made a sound and not one body left their seats until the credits were finished. The theater remained silent until the house lights came on. This is a good sign of an impactful film. Nobody stayed to see an after-credit scene to The Whale. They stayed to just let the art sink in. The Whale was directed by Darren Aronofsky with a screenplay adapted from the play by Samuel D. Hunter. Now, Aronofsky is a unique vision when it comes to his films, and a lot of his films are not going to be for everybody, including this one. But he has a way of gaining an emotional response or reaction, if you will, and most of that time isn't going to be a warm and fuzzy emotional response. Aronofsky has a way to use our characters and settings to his visual desire and bring out the misery that the world could potentially be, and he calls it out for how he sees it without any sort of censorship. And he does this with well-written characters that we feel an on-screen bond with. He makes these characters real and relatable, and not in the physical sense like our 600-pound Charlie necessarily, but in the sense what goes through our thought process of these characters that we can really relate to. And whether that's some of the feelings that we've all experienced from mental weight of regret, guilt, loneliness, and not just a sense of self-worth, but how a build-up events can make you feel irrelevant, not only to oneself, but to the rest of the world. Now, there's no hiding that Charlie is put on display for audiences to see, as some may view as an overdone spectacle to trigger a reaction and a false sense of emotion. But viewers need to see past that and see it in another aspect of being. There is no more to Charlie than a physical appearance, but what events lead him to that and who he has become. Charlie buried his pain, guilt, and sadness in seclusion in his apartment by just eating and holding his emotions in. There are scenes that show examples of feeling guilt, of not wanting to be a burden to anybody, but then he has a bigger weight of guilt, being a burden by the weight he has put on. Most of these scenes we see Charlie battling his guilt with his nurse and friend Liz, played by Hong Chow, who gives another stellar performance here. As Charlie faces his own mortality set in by Liz, reality closes in on what bad shape he is really in. Charlie reaches out to his daughter Ellie, played by Sadie Sink, that he hasn't seen since he was 8, who is now a struggling teen being 17. When we see Ellie first appear on screen with Charlie, our focus of pain is redirected by Ellie as his daughter that hasn't seen a father figure in over 9 years. And Ellie now sees her father in a physical state that she wasn't prepared for. As growing up as a fatherless teenager, she makes her feelings known. And even with Ellie's absolute raw, stern, emotionless attitude towards her dad, and having her emotional teenage wall put up, she delivers her hatred words towards him. We don't favor either character, we feel for the situation of both. It's a brilliant balance, and we feel sadness for the situation and not necessarily each individual. Charlie is also visited by a teenage boy, Thomas, played by Ty Simpkins, who wants to try and save Charlie in the eyes of God. Now, the dialogue between Thomas and Charlie does spark some mild, thought-provoking points, but it really doesn't deep dive enough to really spark a memorable chemistry between the two. But between daughter Ellie, nurse Liz, and the missionary Thomas, the three act as a symbol of Charlie's past, present, and future. And Charlie is forced to face these three when he accepts his own mortality. Our supporting three characters have some quick, sharp dialogue that is confident and fast-paced when we compare it to Brendan Fraser's timid, apologetic nature, which is smart writing by Samuel D. Hunter to ensure the eyes come off of Charlie's character and we put a focus on the feeling and thoughts of our supporting cast. Now, I remember the first time watching a Darren Aronofsky film, which was Requiem for a Dream. This is another film that stood with me for years. This is a movie that wasn't for everybody, and it taps into uncomfortable topics with uncomfortable dialogue, but with characters that are so real and raw that we have no choice but to follow along until the end is almost living a nightmare. And this is the type of movie that really gets into your head with the flawless execution to really ruin your day emotionally. But here's the thing. That is the intent of the filmmaker, to take this topic surrounding addiction and not sugarcoat it from reality from the camera. For a movie that can affect you in a way like Requiem for a Dream does, it's skilled filmmaking at its best, without using just the shock and disgust factor to get a reaction from the viewer. It's an excellent executed vision. You might not like the way you feel afterwards, but the fact it affected you is master filmmaking. And here we get the same kind of feeling from The Whale, only on a more personal level with relatability of our characters' feelings. Aronofsky has a real challenge in this one compared to his previous works. He has to break through to the audience as not just focusing on a physical image we see on screen, but to tap into the emotional connection of empathy to the audience. The Whale didn't necessarily give me the, well, that ruined my day feeling as Requiem for a Dream, but it did stay with me as I was leaving the theater, and it is still in my head, and it is a lingering sadness and empathy, not just for Brendan Fraser, but for the entire cast. I use Requiem for a Dream as a comparison to The Whale because we see Aronofsky use similar techniques to build that raw human emotion in the movie. And we see that kind of style in his previous works. Requiem for a Dream and The Whale use prominent style techniques from Aronofsky, but Aronofsky has also done some previous works, more notable 1998's Pi, 2006's The Fountain, 2014's Noah, and 2017's elevated horror flick Mother. The Whale is a film that will most likely split audiences and critics alike, just like what we saw from Requiem for a Dream. Some people might not like going to the movies to feel sad right after and not know why they feel sad the rest of the day. And with some audiences today, they're not used to having the extreme feel of pure, raw, honest human emotion and the honesty from a film like this. It is also a movie that is truly open for interpretation, but one thing is for sure, it is nearly impossible not to appreciate the absolutely breathtaking performance from Brendan Fraser. And if you plan on seeing The Whale, I recommend to see past just the physical appearance of Fraser's character and not make an emotional judgment just based on that. And understand this, that the depth of what his character says is just as powerful, if not more, just like how it should be. The Whale is a story that's full of pure raw human elements that's supported by great performances from the supporting cast, and for sure will be a comeback role for Brendan Fraser, who will take you on an emotional roller coaster of the soul with a performance that will stay in your head for years to come. This is one of the most powerful journeys you can take in a movie in a long time. The Whale is one of the best movies of 2022. I'm giving The Whale 4 stars. It's so hard to keep track and even have time to read all the trending topics on the web. Now there's a new app to help with all of those problems. Newsly is an audio app for iOS and Android. It picks up web articles about the most trending topics on the web at any given moment and reads them to you in a natural human voice. For the first time in the history of the internet, the entire web becomes listenable. Browse articles from topics you choose and start playing. You can follow any topic as specific as you like, from sports, science, to Bitcoin. You can even follow Kardashian. It will find you the latest articles and read them to you out loud. And guess what? They have podcasts as well. Explore trending podcasts from over 50 countries. The Movie Wire is now a featured podcast on the Newsly app. Download and use Newsly for free now. The link will be in the description of this episode. You can also use one of my promo codes that you will find in the description as well to get you a 1-month free premium subscription. Stop scrolling, start listening, download Newsly today. Number 3 is Everything Everywhere All at Once. Now, in my intro, I mentioned movies that we view that we haven't seen before, and this one falls into that. This movie at times can be utterly bizarre, but it doesn't cross the line into unpleasant territory. It is a cleverly written, funny, and mesmerizing cinematic experience that stands out of the crowd. There are not a lot of movies out there that have people with hot dog fingers, Jamie Lee Curtis as an IRS agent, and Ke Huy Quan's return to the big screen. From episode 15, Everything Everywhere All at Once. This is going to be my second review in a week about a multiverse movie. Last week, I reviewed Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and as I said in my review, that was a film that got held back by red tape and high criteria that Marvel places on the filmmakers. Then comes this movie, about a multiverse that must have been a complete gamble for the studio. I can only imagine reading the script sober and saying, that sounds like a great movie. No, this movie must have looked bonkers on paper. This movie is the result of letting creative juices flow and investing in a creative team. That a feat that Marvel cannot let go of, no matter who the director is. The film stars Michelle Yeoh as Evelyn Wang, an aging Chinese immigrant who's swept up in an insane adventure where she alone can save the world by exploring other universes, connecting with the lives she could have led. The film also brings back some childhood giddiness to me by bringing in Ke Huy Quan, who many of us know as Short Round from the Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Quan plays the husband, Waymond Wang. The film kicks us off right away with a very busy household that is very chaotic. So chaotic to the point it was giving me anxiety and stress just watching it. The last time a film did that was Uncut Gems with Adam Sandler. Watching the Wang family and their stressful household really starts to define the title of Everything Everywhere All at Once. The Wangs find themselves in some financial woes with the IRS, and they have a meeting with their IRS auditor, Dietrich, played by the one and only Jamie Lee Curtis. In the IRS building, Evelyn is visited by another version of her husband, Waymond, who is asking for Evelyn's help to save the universe. Now, before we deep dive into this movie, I just want to say that this is not a one-time watch. This is a multiple times you have to see this movie to really respect what you're viewing. There is a lot to this movie to take in, but if you enjoyed some of the plot points and you don't really want to think about it, that's you. You don't have to see it multiple times. And I can understand that this might not be some audience's cup of tea. And I'll talk about some of those examples later in this, but this movie isn't without its obvious plot holes. And wait a minute moments. It has some flaws, as you are to expect when covering such topics as time travel, or in this case, the multiverse concept, but the film takes us on a journey that's pure relatable, pure honest, and fun, that we forgive that in this film. It's like when your uncle says something inappropriate at the dinner table, and you just simply change the topic. That's what this film does, but in a smart way. The film covers a lot of genres from sci-fi to comedy to drama, and one genre is hard for some filmmakers to master, and there is a lot of emotion to cover successfully in this film, especially with so many plot points going in different directions. The film was directed by Dan Kwan and Daniel Scheinert, who both recently wrote and directed the Daniel Radcliffe and Paul Dano's film Swiss Army Men about a farting corpse. And it doesn't surprise me these two would come up with something like this. These two filmmakers have a good chemistry, and they really seem to push the envelope to the point of a positive insanity. They are the definition of the popular saying, "It's so crazy, it just might work." And this film, it does. The film successfully will make you laugh. It'll make you cry. It'll make you think beyond what you are just witnessing on the screen. The film takes you on a journey of emotion without even realizing you're on it. The action sequences are some of the most well choreographed fighting scenes I have seen in a long time. This film will be this generation's Matrix when it comes to its action scenes. What I liked about what the filmmakers put in these action scenes is a level of absurdity where you ask yourself, did I actually just see that? They also take some of the most basic props and even turn those into a focus, whether it's chapstick, a Bluetooth headset from 2007, dildos, butt plugs, and yeah, I did say a dildo and butt plugs, but I'll get into that in a second. By adding these basic props, it segues naturally into a comedy sketch that is, again, something I have not seen before. Now, there are scenes in this film that had me laughing hysterically because of how bizarre it is. And I started laughing about it about 30 minutes later after it happens while watching the movie. And then when I left the theater, I was still laughing. I was still laughing at what I witnessed in this over 2-hour movie. The film is very funny, and I have a feeling this will have a cult following after it reaches more audiences. Now, just recently, I talked about having creative limitations in film and limiting the audience and the amount of people that come see your movie if it's rated R. The filmmakers definitely took a mile when the studio gave them an inch. I can never picture Marvel following this formula. Can never picture Marvel giving the go-ahead of Thor pulling out his mighty dildo or the Hulk jumping on a butt plug during a battle. But hey, that's Marvel's prerogative. Not everybody wants to see it. I get it. But there are fight scenes in this film that involve sex toys, and they are very clever to the point where you're just staring at it in amazement. It's like when Thor pulls out his hammer for the first time. You just kind of stare on what you're witnessing on the screen. Now, there's a lot to discuss about this film when you leave. It is a great discussion film, and like I said, needs to be watched a couple times to really appreciate the message it's sending. The film does start to lose a little bit of steam towards the final act, where we find the filmmakers trying to tie their messaging of the film into a nice little bow. This holds the movie back a little. The movie runs for about 2 hours and 20 minutes, but could have cut the additional 20 minutes, where I found a couple of times where it could have come to an end. But at the same time, if the filmmakers wanted that extra 20 minutes to over-explain their messaging, they absolutely earned it for the risk, entertainment, and emotional ride they released into the world for the audiences to enjoy. The film is set to release on digital platforms next week. Make sure not to miss this one, giving it 3.5 stars. And we're down to the final two. Sitting at number 2 is the mesmerizing film Tar. Like The Whale, this is one of those movies that gets right into your head and mesmerizes you with the powerhouse performance of Cate Blanchett and the incredibly powerful musical scores. Tar is a slow burn of internal emotional chaos as a result of the domino effect of poor moral decisions, and the weight of power you think you have over another can come crashing down faster the heavier it is. Tar spends the entire runtime hypnotizing its viewer and is another film that will be remembered for years to come. From episode 42, here is Tar. written and directed by Todd Field, whose only directorial films are some small, lesser-known films like the fantastic film Little Children from 2006 and In the Bedroom from 2001, or a lot of us might know him from playing Tim Belzer Lewis in the 1996 film Twister. And let me tell you, Todd Fields has come a long way since chasing Twisters in 1996 to bring us a brilliantly crafted character study, and this will be his breakout writing and directorial credit. Now, right from the beginning seconds of Tar, something already different was happening that pleased me. At the end of each one of my shows, I ask listeners to do me a favor, and that's to stay for after the credits to show respect for those that put their blood, sweat, and tears into making a feature film. Todd Fields places the credits in the beginning of this movie. You can tell the amount of training, work, and passion went into making this film. And rightfully so, this was a brilliant move to ensure that all creators got credit in front of a mass audience. Tar is the type of movie that those making films based on or inspired by figures of history should take a lesson from Todd Fields. Even though the story of Lydia Tar is a fictionalized character, the film treats the audience like a looking glass into a realistic life. It doesn't sugarcoat or dumb anything down for the audience to gain attention, including the music and composer's language. It challenges the audience to use more of context clues to understand the conversation around compositions. I've had the pleasure and benefit of playing and studying music since I was 10, and I'm a huge fan of the classical and opera genre, and for the most part I could follow along amongst the language. But again, I have not made it my life's work to study the composition or interpretation of music, and some of it did go over my head. But the context clues the dialogue offers is enough to keep our attention and kind of follow along with what the characters are saying. As I wrote my review for this film before the show, I got inspired, so I broke out my Vivaldi album of the 4 seasons, more specifically my favorite, which is Winter Opus 8, number 4 in F minor. And as I listened, I became more and more impressed with the attention to detail the entire cast and creators and crew put into this film. And even more so, I give Cate Blanchett, who plays Lydia Tar, a ton of credit. This is one of her best performances of her career. Watching her brought me back to looking at the conductor's direction, especially doing solo numbers, remembering making eye contact and just waiting for a nod or a grimace of acknowledgement of accomplishment from the maestro, or waiting for the dreaded hand gesture of improvement during. Hats off to Cate Blanchett for the work she must have put into this role. I know this is not an easy task to learn, and to make it so convincing as she does, she could be conducting a live concert and I wouldn't have been able to tell the difference. There is no doubt in my mind that she will be on the list of nominees when it comes to Oscar time. Now, I know not everybody is going to have the same experience with this movie as I did. There was a certain sentiment I had while watching this movie, but what audiences can take away is appreciation for the cast and crew, for the amount of work that went into making a film of this magnitude, and for the brilliant character study the creators offer. Now, Lydia Tar is consistently distracted by her sensitive hearing, from things such as car vents knocking to a metronome, which has even argumentally given her the talent to hear the perfect pitch, in which you can see when this is heard by Tar when she gives her perfect emotional response from her ensemble, but has an even bigger distraction of having the reputation of being a world-renowned conductor. There is a hint of abuse of ego and power that trickles through the movie about a previous female colleague that Tar refers to as unstable and unfortunate throughout the film, and there are subtle hints of this mysterious character that grow as we see the progression of Tar's character's actions, or see her behavior crescendo irrationally, if you will. The majority of the film's surroundings and events are almost told in a world where we see it as Lydia Tar sees it. We see brief interactions from characters that interact with Tar, just enough to give us a true analysis of what each character is thinking. The only thing we are left with is the body language from some of the characters as they interact with Tar. The only time we get a verbal acknowledgement that there is something not right about Lydia Tar is when we are introduced to scenes with Lydia's partner Sharon, with yet another electrifying performance by Nina Haas. And this is because these two share an intimate relationship to make it known and relative that something isn't right with Tar. Tar gives an example of partners knowing each other's behaviors, but still, at the same time, we still have mysteries and skeletons in the closet of our own. And this example shines through both of our characters between Haas and Blanchett. Director Todd Fields uses this craft of limited interactions and brief scenes to build a curiosity around Lydia Tarr and to ensure that the viewer doesn't have a chance to place judgment on Lydia Tarr too soon. We also see Fields' sharp dialogue to help support his vision of building upon Tarr's character. There is a line delivered to Lydia as she has lunch with an old colleague, where she asks for his advice on accusations. He responds with a line that we all have going through our minds and way too often lately, which is, be accused of something is the same as being guilty. Tarr is an example of why these films are meant for the big screen and not for streaming. This movie demands your attention to detail of the character's emotions, body language, and development. Blanchett's interpretation of the role couldn't be more spot on, as it is a subtle human performance that keeps her composure throughout the film until a final breaking point that one would argue seems too random and out of place, but I would argue to which seems too real and human. To reach a pivotal moment in success that you rely on the status quo and to have it ripped from you with little to no control. And the film does a great job not pointing a direct finger of guilt towards Lydia, but leaves enough to interpret and even question ourselves on what's the truth or even what side is believable, or is Lydia Tarr conducting us as one of her symphonies to make us believe her vision. Tarr, with no doubt in my mind, will be and does deserve to be part of awards time. That includes Best Actress with Cate Blanchett and writer-director Todd Fields. This is a movie that demands your full attention on our characters and will be an outstanding character study for film students in the coming years. For some moviegoers that don't enjoy a slow burn and a film surrounded around its characters to drive the film, they might find this not to be their cup of tea. But for me, I found Cate Blanchett's performance mesmerizing, the rest of the ensemble captivating, and this film to be one of the best movies of the year. I'm giving Tarr 4 stars. Now, before I get into the final pick and my number one favorite movie of 2022, there's been a lot of outstanding films this year, and it was hard to pick just 10. But I want to give honorable mentions to 3 other films this year, and that is the Predator prequel, Prey, that barely escaped the list, Top Gun Maverick, that I actually enjoyed more than the original, and another film that really shows what Adam Sandler can do after Uncut Gems, which is the fantastic Netflix original Hustle. All these 3 films are available to stream now and are fantastic movies to check out. All the films that I have announced in this episode, again, are available to stream right now, with the exception of The Whale. Make sure to check these fantastic films out. They truly made 2022 a memorable film-going experience. And now let's jump into my number one pick of 2022. And finally, here is my number one favorite movie of 2022. And this was such a hard decision, especially with the top 5 on where this was going to place. But at the end of the day, it was no question. Sitting at number 1 is The Banshee of Inisherin. And those that have listened to my show may not find this as a pure surprise on this pick. I called it out as my prediction that will win the most awards come awards time. And The Banshee of Inisherin is a true achievement across the board in filmmaking, from the cinematography that just doesn't give us pretty shots to give us pretty shots, but to include the settings into the story as support, to the acting, chemistry, and the performances between the entire cast, to the mesmerizing lighting, camera shots, and dry humor and music. This film I absolutely loved, and looking at the top 5, at the end of the day, this one had no doubt in my mind this was my favorite. From episode 44, here is The Banshee of Inisherin. Now, no matter what, I always sit through the entirety of the credits of a movie out of respect to the filmmakers and talent, and to gain some knowledge of the names of what I like. Most people, unfortunately, do not do this unless the studios tease you to stay with a post-credit scene in a big blockbuster film. There were about 15 to 20 people in my theater, and as the credits popped up, I did not hear one sound of a theater seat change. I looked around the theater and everybody was still sitting. Even more so, the couple in front of me started a discussion about the film. film. And yes, I was eavesdropping, so sue me. The gentleman made a comment that I didn't expect. He broke down what he took away from the film. He made a comment about a piece of symbolism in the film that was quite brilliant. He brought up the topic of religion and said in the time of war, facing your own mortality, with not even having the luxuries like today, including electricity, social relationships in a small town in the middle of a war couldn't survive without a bartender and a priest. The two go hand in society. I wanted to hear where this man was going to go with it, but the partner he was with didn't acknowledge this comment. I stared at the back of the gentleman's partner's head, waiting for her to acknowledge this man so I can hear where he was going, but instead she blew her nose and took a sip of water. He was on to something that got me to think on the way home, and as the credits ended, almost in unison, we all got up and headed towards the exit door, in which multiple groups were having small discussions on this film. I was in heaven. This is a rare film that can make every member of an audience stay in their seats for the credits, and not only that, but have a discussion about it right away. The Banshees of Inisherin is written and directed by Martin McDonagh, who is a master at character direction with his character-driven films, but also his eye for the perfect master shots to capture true emotion with the camera. I have yet to see a film of McDonagh's that isn't a true genius when it comes to his directorial style. He has written and directed the 2008 film In Bruges, 2012's Seven Psychopaths, 2018's Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, and those were appetizers compared to his finest work to date in The Banshee of Inisherin. McDonagh brings back Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson from the 2008 film In Bruges, and the two here are electrifying on screen together. They have a chemistry that just feels real and natural, and the two just flow on screen when they deliver their dialogue. The two have a likability by using the opposites attract formula where they are completely different, and McDonagh is a craftsman at his character writing where they never truly gives too much away about his characters. McDonagh brings back Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson from 2008's In Bruges, and the two are electrifying on screen together. They have a chemistry that just feels real, and the two just flow on screen when they deliver their dialogue. The two have a likability by using the opposites attract formula where they are completely different, and McDonagh is a craftsman at his character writing where he never truly gives too much away about his characters. Even from the mere presence of his characters, Padraic and Colm seem basic, but as the two characters adapt to the progression of the story, McDonagh gives the audience just enough to build curiosity about each one's intent or motivation to act the way they do towards each other, but with an underlying understanding of each other. Each of our characters poses to put each other in a situation where it leaves the audience to wonder where the filmmakers are really going to take this. I remember sitting there 20 minutes into the film, really enjoying the dialogue and performances, but I thought to myself, how is McDonagh going to stretch this into a 2-hour film? And he has a talent and method of slowly pulling you into his films without you even realizing it, but using his talent of character creation to give the audience a sense of wonder of what the creation's going to be. Now, every day at 2 p.m., Padraic goes to the home of Colm, and they head to the pub until one day, Padraic knocks on Colm's home, and Colm ignores his knock. Later, the two end up at the pub where Colm has to explain to Padraic he doesn't want to be friends anymore. When Padraic questions this, he is met with just a plain basic, I don't like you anymore. This turns Padraic obsessed into finding out why, and this pushes Colm to be more obsessed into not telling Padraic why. And at times, Padraic's obsessing just seems to run on the verge of stupidity. But as the theme of loneliness and acceptance, and Padraic and Colm are not the only ones to seem to be longing for company. The film even brings up this feeling of Colm secluding himself out of being depressed. But as we look around the town of all the cast and characters, we start to discover that all the characters seem to show a sign of depression and some sort of loneliness. There's an almost symbolic character in this film, Mrs. McCormick, played by Sheila Flitton, that tends to amplify people's vulnerabilities, whether she's a banshee or a mere symbol of depression, will be left to the viewer's interpretation. The film, when it gets to its climax, some of the audience members may tend to think, well, that escalated quickly. The climax does give off an uncomfortable and unsettling feeling, but the film never rushes its theme. It graciously takes its time to truly let the audience be engulfed into the story, settings, and characters, with some of the best shots I have seen in years. The film is defined as a dark comedy drama, and there are times in this movie where we are wondering if we should even be laughing or are we supposed to be shocked. You will know what I'm talking about when you see it. That just a mere sound made me chuckle, but then it had me thinking why I'm even laughing at it in the first place. But all the talent involved have earned the right to be edgy in its dark humor. It didn't treat itself as a just going for shock factor film. It used its characters to prove a point, and that's what makes the dark humor in this work. It's not overpowering, it's subtle at times, but when it actually gets edgy, it actually gets edgy. edgy, and it does so with a point in mind, and that is the pure brilliance of the writing and the dialogue in this movie. This is one of those films I have been talking about more and more on my show, where it must be seen on a big screen to truly appreciate the characters' body language and interactions, and of course a beautiful cinematography by Ben Davis, who strangely enough is known for his work as a director of photography for numerous Marvel films. This will truly be his work of art on his resume. I will be utterly shocked if this film doesn't show up on the following categories during Oscars: Best Director, Best Actor, Supporting Actor, Editing, Original Screenplay, Original Score, and of course, Best Picture. The Banshee of Inisherin is McDonagh's masterpiece, where he gets almost every detail right, from the character direction, from the cinematography, from the camera shots, to the scenic views, to the pacing of it. This is not only one of his masterpieces, but it is the best film of the year. And I know we still have December to come, but this is going to be a tough one to beat for one of my best films of the year. I'm giving The Banshees of Inisherin a very passionate, solid 4 stars. And that's a cut on not only this episode of The Movie Wire, but on 2022. It's been a fantastic year at the movies, and I cannot wait to see what 2023 brings. And again, I want to thank you all for your support, and thank you for listening. You can also show support by following me on Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd at Movie Wire Show. I will be back later this weekend with a featured review of Plane and 3 other films. Until then, do me a favor, make sure you stay for after the credits to show respect for those that put their blood, sweat, and tears into making a feature film, and make sure you support your local movie theaters.
A verdict has been made on this episode of The Movie Wire by your host, Justin Henson. He thanks you for listening to the show. You can follow Justin on Instagram and Twitter at Movie Wire Show, or visit his website, www.themoviewire.com. Oh, and don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. Until next time, we will see you at the movies.
Thank you for bringing me to the movies.